Kaplan from SC Magazine, and welcome to a special video today with Urvish Vashi, who is the VP of Marketing at AlertLogic. AlertLogic sells software as a service solutions to cloud infrastructure providers. Urvish, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I know over the years that as the cloud has grown, companies have had a tough time overcoming some of the trust issues of moving some data to the cloud, but I would imagine if they feel that security is in place within some of these environments, they'll be more likely to move on over. What are you seeing on that front?
I mean, I think that's entirely true. And what's kind of interesting is, cloud infrastructure in many ways is following the same trend that we've seen anytime there's kind of a paradigm shift on how people choose to buy anything, really. And so, if you think about, what was previously called, outsourcing, in the 80s and 90s to ASPs in the early 2000s to SaaS providers to now cloud, you go through the exact same sort of adoption curve cycle, which is I'm worried about two things. I'm worried about security and I'm worried about loss of control. And over time, the industry solves how to address that issue for their customers, and then it becomes commonplace, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what we're seeing in cloud environments. I think it is entirely appropriate for customers to hold cloud infrastructure providers to task around what their security capabilities are. And I think that the flip side of that is I think cloud infrastructure providers are doing a pretty good job on the front end of addressing them. And so as a result, they're starting to build tools and solutions and offerings that are integrated into the cloud services that help deliver security. Now, the biggest challenge that they have there is they do struggle to look, a CIO square in the eye and tell them, I can provide the exact same set of security tools and breadth of tools in hosted and cloud environments that you can do on-prem. But I think as much as that's a problem of cloud providers, I think that's an industry problem we have to go and solve.
Yeah. So you're seeing that a lot. I mean, generally speaking, security has been pretty well built into some of the, when we're talking about cloud, when we're talking about something like Google Apps, they do a good job. But when you're talking about moving to something like Amazon Web Services, Rackspace, those sort of companies traditionally have maybe given a little bit of a pushback on security back to the customer, but now they're finding that it is a good competitive differentiator.
That's right. I mean, I think that, there's no question that more enterprise apps are moving to hosted environments. And in fact, we just saw some recent research from 451 Research that said that only about 10% of spending is going to sort of outsource data centers in one form or another. 90% of it is still happening inside the walls of service providers. As that number starts to grow, that means that more enterprise apps are going to move to the cloud. And so, companies like Rackspace, as you mentioned, and Amazon, although Amazon kind of takes a little bit of a purist view on this with what they call their shared security model, they're inherently being put on the hook to at least provide options to their customers. Mm-hmm. So companies like Rackspace, companies like Navisite, DataPipe, those guys have been in the business of providing managed security services, and they continue to grow their portfolio to address their customer needs. But absolutely, I mean, they need the help of the industry to provide tools that are actually deployable and manageable in hosted and cloud environments. And today, there aren't a lot of players that are doing that.
Yeah. AlertLogic offers things like IPS, sells to these providers things like IPS, vulnerability management assessment, those sort of products. Does that speak to sort of the threats that customers need to concern themselves with when they move to the cloud? What are some of the main risks there?
Yeah, so one of the things that it's almost kind of like might call it a boon, right? If you look at a lot of the research that's going on right now, you're hearing a lot about sort of a class of threats around malware, all the sort of threat vectors that get opened up by like BYOD sort of initiatives that are finding their way into enterprise environments. Once you move to cloud environments, you have kind of a much more narrow infrastructure stack to deal with, right? You're dealing with databases, storage, web servers. There's just a much narrower set of things, of infrastructure challenges that you're trying to solve. And by extension, the surface area of security is actually sort of reduced a little bit. And so, we very much focus on thinking of the threats that exist in application infrastructure, right? Which means that, among other things, web application attacks, big area of threats that need to be understood. Obviously, core server vulnerabilities, what's going on at the network layer.
And these cloud providers are under attack in much of the same way that individual organizations are targeted?
Oh, no question about it. In fact, what is interesting, as we found in our research, we've got a security research team that looks at data across the industry, is what we found is that infrastructure in hosted and cloud environments is actually less likely to be attacked, less often and across a narrower range of threats than similar infrastructure on-prem. And so I think, that's certainly a point in time. That trend might change over time. That's been the case, certainly, as long as we've been looking at the data, which is, the last several years. But I think that the initial sort of concern of, is infrastructure in the cloud fundamentally insecure? I don't think the data supports that, or at least sees a higher level of threats. I don't think the data supports that, but I don't think that'll hold up indefinitely.
Yeah, and as these providers begin to offer more and more security solutions, I would imagine we're going to continue to see transition over to the cloud.
Well, I think so. I mean, the point is threats are going to follow the infrastructure, right? And so as more business critical apps, more sort of critical sensitive data finds itself in hosted and cloud environments, I think we will potentially see some of the threat landscape change, which is why service providers like Amazon, like Rackspace, like some of the others we talked about are sort of rapidly focusing on creating more breadth in the security options that they're making available for their customers.
Okay, very good. Urvish Vashi, the VP of Marketing at Alert Logic. Thanks for talking cloud with us today.
Thank you.